Chapter 10. The plane from Washington to Birmingham was half empty. Graham took a window seat with no one beside him. He declined the tired sandwich the stewardess offered and put his Jacoby file on the tray table. At the front, he had listed the similarities between the Jacobys and the Leeds. Both couples were in their late 30s. Both had children, 2 boys and a girl. Edward Jacoby had another son by a previous marriage, who was away at college when the family was killed. Both parents, in each case, had college degrees, and both families lived in 2-story houses in pleasant suburbs. Mrs. Jacoby and Mrs. Leeds were attractive women. The families had some of the same credit cards, and they subscribed to some of the same popular magazines. There, the similarities ended. Charles Leeds was a tax attorney, while Edward Jacoby was an engineer and metallurgist. The Atlanta family were Presbyterian. The Jacobys were Catholic. The Leeds were lifelong Atlanta residents, while the Jacobys had lived in Birmingham only 3 months, transferred there from Detroit. The word random sounded in Graham's head like a drippy faucet. Random selection of victims, no apparent motive. Newspapers used those terms, and detectives spat them out in anger and frustration in homicide squad rooms. Random wasn't accurate, though. Graham knew that mass murderers and serial murderers do not select their victims at random. The man who killed the Jacobys and the Leeses saw something in them that drew him and drove him to do it. He might have known them well. Graham hoped so. Or he might not have known them at all. But Graham was sure the killers saw them at some time before he killed them. He chose them because something in them spoke to him, and the women were the core of it. What was it? There were some differences in the crimes. Edward Jacoby was shot as he came down the stairs carrying a flashlight. Probably he was awakened by a noise. Mrs. Jacoby and her children were shot in the head, Mrs. Leeds in the abdomen. The weapon was a 9mm automatic pistol in all the shootings. Traces of steel wool from a homemade silencer were found in the wounds. The cartilage cases bore no fingerprints. The knife had been used only on Charles Leeds. Dr. Princey believed it was thin-bladed and very keen, possibly a filleting knife. The methods of entry were different too. A patio door pried open at the Jacobys, the glass cutter at the Leedses. Photographs of the crime in Birmingham did not show the quality or the quantity of blood found at the Leedses, but there were stains on the bedroom walls about 2 1/2 feet above the floor. So the killer had an audience in Birmingham too. The Birmingham police checked the bodies for fingerprints, including the fingernails, and found nothing. Burial for a summer month in Birmingham would destroy any prints like the ones on the Leeds child. In both places were the same blonde hairs, same spit, same semen. Graham propped photographs of the 2 smiling families against the seat back in front of him and stared at them for a long time in the hanging quiet of the airplane. What could have attracted the murderers specifically to them? Graham wanted very much to believe there was a common factor and that he would find it soon. Otherwise, he would have to enter more houses and see what the Tooth Fairy had left for him. Graham got directions from the Birmingham field office and checked in with the police by telephone from the airport. The compact car he rented spit water from the air conditioner vents onto his arms and hands. His first stop was the 𝘠𝘕𝘦 Realty office on Denson Avenue. 𝘠𝘕𝘦, tall and bald, made haste across his turquoise shag to greet Graham. His smile faded when Graham showed his identification and asked for the key to the Jacoby house. "Will there be some cops in uniform out there today?" he asked, his hand on top of his head. "I don't know. I hope to God not. I've got to show it twice this afternoon. It's a nice house. People see it and they forget this other. Last Thursday I had a couple from Duluth, substantial retired people hot on the Sunbelt. I had them down to the short rows talking mortgages. I mean, that man could have fronted a third when the squad car rode up and in they came. Couple asked them questions, and boy, did they get some answers. These good officers gave them the whole tour, who was laying where. Then it was goodbye, 𝘠𝘕𝘦. Much obliged for your trouble. I tried to show them how safe we've fixed it, but they didn't listen. There they go, jack-legged through the gravel, climbing back in their sedan DeVille." How many single men asked to look at it? "They haven't asked me. It's a multiple listing. I don't think so, though. Police wouldn't let us start painting until, I don't know, we just got finished inside last Tuesday. Took 2 coats of interior latex, 3 in places. We're still working on the outside. It'll be a genuine showplace." "How can you sell it before the estate's probated?" "I can't close until probate. That doesn't mean I can't be ready. People could move in on a memorandum of understanding. I need to do something. A business associate of mine is holding the paper, and that interest just works all day and all night while you're sleeping." "Who is Mr. Jacoby's executor?" "Brian Metcalf, firm of the Metcalf and Bonds. How long you figure on being out there?" "I don't know. Until I've finished." "You can drop that key in the mail. You don't have to come back by." Graham had the flat feeling of a cold trail as he drove out to the Jacoby house. It was barely within city limits, in an area newly annexed. He stopped beside the highway once to check his map before he found the turnoff onto an asphalt secondary road. More than a month had passed since they were killed. What had he been doing then? Putting a pair of diesels in a 65-foot Ryback hull, signaling to Ariega in the crane to come down another half-inch. Molly came over in the late afternoon, and he and Molly and Ariega sat under an awning in the cockpit of the half-finished boat and ate the big prawns Molly brought and drank cold �々𝘕𝘄𝑗 beer. 𝘰𝘄𝑗 explained the best way to clean crayfish, drawing the tail fan in sawdust on the deck, and then the sunlight, broken on the water, played on the undersides of the wheeling gills. Water from the air conditioner squirted on the front of Graham's shirt, and he was in Birmingham now, and there were no prawns or gulls. He was driving, and pastures and wooded lots were on his right, with goats and horses in them, and on his left was Stonebridge, a long-established residential area with a few elegant homes and a number of rich people's houses. He saw the realtor's sign 100 yards before he reached it. The Jacoby house was the only one on the right side of the road. Sap from the pecan trees beside the drive had made the gravel sticky, and it rattled inside the fenders of the car. A carpenter on a ladder was installing window guards. The workman raised a hand to Graham as he walked around the house. A flagged patio at the side was shaded by a large oak tree. At night, the tree would block out the floodlight in the side yard as well. This was where the tooth fairy had entered, through sliding glass doors. The doors had been replaced with new ones. The aluminum frames still bright and bearing the manufacturing sticker. Covering the sliding doors was a new wrought iron security gate. The basement door was new too, flush steel and secured by deadbolts. The components of a hot tub stood in crates on the flagstones. Graham went inside. Bare floors and dead air. His footsteps echoed in the empty house. The new mirrors in the bedrooms had never reflected the Jacobys' faces or the killers. On each was a fuzzy white spot where the price had been torn off. A folded dropcloth lay in a corner of the master bedroom. Graham sat on it long enough for the sunlight through the bare windows to move one board width across the floor. There was nothing here, nothing anymore. If he had come here immediately after the Jacobys were killed, would the lead still be alive? Graham wondered. He tested the weight of that burden. It did not lift when he was outside of the house and under the sky again. Graham stood in the shade of a pecan tree, shoulders hunched, hands in his pockets, and looked down the long drive to the road that passed in front of the Jacoby house. How had the tooth fairy come to the Jacoby house? He had to drive. Where did he park? The gravel driveway was too noisy for a midnight visit, Graham thought. The Birmingham police did not agree. He walked down the drive to the roadside. The asphalt road was bordered with ditches as far as he could see. It might be possible to pull across the ditch and hide a vehicle in the brush on the Jacoby side of the road if the ground were hard and dry. Facing the Jacoby house, across the road, was a single entrance to Stonebridge. The sign that said Stonebridge had a private patrol service. A strange vehicle would be noticed there. So would a man walking late at night. Scratch parking in Stonebridge. Graham went back into the house and was surprised to find the telephone working. He called the Weather Bureau and learned that 3 inches of rain fell on the day before the Jacobies were killed. The ditches were full then. The Tooth Fairy did not hide his vehicle beside the asphalt road. A horse in the pasture beside the yard kept pace with Graham as he walked along the whitewashed fence toward the rear of the property. Sorry. He gave the horse a lifesaver and left him at the corner as he turned along the back fence behind the outbuildings. He stopped when he saw the depression in the ground where the Jacoby children had buried their cat. Thinking about it in the Atlanta police station with Springfield, he had pictured the outbuildings as white. Actually, they were dark green. The children had wrapped the cat in a dish towel and buried it in a shoebox with a flower between its paws. Graham rested his forearm on the top of the fence and leaned his forehead against it. A pet funeral, solemn rite of childhood. Parents going back into the house, ashamed to pray. The children looking at one another, discovering new nerves in the place loss pierces. One bows her head, then they all do, the shovel taller than any of them. After a discussion of whether or not the cat is in heaven with God and Jesus, the children don't shout for a while. A certainty came to Graham as he stood, sun hot on his back and neck. As surely as the Tooth Fairy killed the cat, he had watched the children bury it. He had to see that if he possibly could. He did not make 2 trips out here, one to kill the cat and the second for the Jacobies. He came and killed the cat and waited for the children to find it. There was no way to determine exactly where the children found the cat. The police had located no one who spoke to the Jacobies after noon, 10 hours or so before they died. How had the Tooth Fairy come, and where had he waited? Behind the back fence, the brush again, running head high for 30 yards to the trees. Graham dug his wrinkled map out of his back pocket and spread it on the fence. It showed an unbroken strip of woods a 1/4 mile deep, running across the back of the Jacoby property and continuing in both directions. Beyond the woods, bounding them on the south, was a section line road that paralleled the one in front of the Jacoby house. Graham drove from the house back to the highway, measuring the distance on his odometer. He went south on the highway and turned onto the section line road he had seen on the map. Measuring again, he drove slowly along it until the odometer showed him he was behind the Jacoby house on the other side of the woods. Here, the pavement ended at a low-income housing project, so new it did not show on his map. He pulled into the parking lot. Most of the cars were old and sagging on their springs. 2 were up on blocks. Black children played basketball on the bare earth around a single netless goal. Graham sat on his fender to watch the game for a minute. He wanted to take off his jacket, but he knew the .44 Special and the flat camera on his belt would attract attention. He always felt a curious embarrassment when people looked at his pistol. There were 8 players on the team wearing shirts. The Skins had 11, all playing at once. Refereeing was by accumulation. The small Skin, shoved down in the rebounding, stalked home mad. He came back, forfeited with a cookie, and dived into the pack again. The yelling and the thump of the ball lifted Graham's spirits. 1 goal, 1 basketball. It struck him again how many things the Leeds had. The Jacobies too, according to the Birmingham police when they ruled out burglary. Boats and sporting equipment, camping equipment, cameras and guns and rods. It was another thing the families had in common. And with that thought of the Leeds and the Jacobies alive came the thought of how they were afterward, and Graham couldn't watch basketball anymore. He took a deep breath and headed for the dark woods across the road. The underbush, heavy at the edge of the pine woods, thinned when Graham reached the deep shade, and he had easy going over the pine needles. The air was warm and still. Blue jays in the trees ahead announced his coming. The ground sloped gently to a dry stream bed where a few cypresses grew at the tracks of raccoons, and field mice were pressed into the red clay. A number of human footprints marked the stream bed, some of them left by children. All were caved in and rounded, left several rains ago. Past the stream bed, the land rose again, changing to sandy loam that supported ferns beneath the pines. Graham worked his way uphill in the heat until he saw the light beneath the trees at the edge of the woods. Between the trunks, he could see the upper story of the Jacoby house. Undergrowth again had high from the edge of the woods the Jacoby's back fence. Graham worked his way through it and stood at the fence looking into the yard. The Tooth Fairy could have parked at the housing development and came through the woods to the brush behind the house. He could have lured the cat into the brush and choked it, the body limp in one hand as he crawled on his knees and the other to the fence. Graham could see the cat in the air, never twisted to land on its feet, but hitting on its back with a thump in the yard. The Tooth Fairy did that in daylight. The children would not find or bury the cat at night. And he waited to see them find it. Did he wait for the rest of the day in the heat of the underbrush? At the fence, he could be visible through the rails. In order to see the yard from the farther back in the brush, he would have to stand and face the windows of the house with the sun beating on him. Clearly, he would go back to the trees. So did Graham. The Birmingham police were not stupid. He could see where they had pushed through the brush, searching the area as a matter of course. But that was before the cat was found. They were looking for clues, dropped objects, tracks, not for a vantage point. He went a few yards into the forest behind the Jacoby house and worked back and forth in the draped shade. First, he took the high ground that afforded a partial view of the yard and then worked his way down the tree line. He had searched for more than an hour when a wink of light from the ground caught his eye. He lost it, found it again. It was the ring pulled tab from a soft drink can, half buried in the leaves beneath an elm tree, one of the few elm trees along the pines. He spotted it from 8 feet away and went no closer for 5 minutes while he scanned the ground around the tree. He squatted and brushed the leaves away ahead of him as he approached the tree, duck walking in the path he made to avoid ruining any impressions. Working slowly, he cleared the leaves all around the trunk. No footprints had pressed through the mat of last year's leaves. Near the aluminum tab, he found a dried apple core eaten thin by ants. Birds had pecked out the seeds. He studied the ground for 10 more minutes. Finally, he sat on the ground, stretched out his aching legs, and leaned back against the tree. A cone of gnats swarmed in a column of sunlight. A caterpillar rippled along the underside of a leaf. There was a wedge of red creek mud from the instep of a boot on the limb above his head. Graham hung his coat on a branch and began to climb carefully on the opposite side of the tree, peering around the trunk at the limbs above the wedge of mud. At 30 feet, he looked around the trunk, and there was the Jacoby house, 175 yards away. It looked different from this height, the roof color dominant. He could see the backyard and the ground behind the outbuildings very well. A distant pair of field glasses would pick up the expression on a face easily at this distance. Graham could hear traffic in the distance, and far away he heard a beagle on a case. A cicada started its numbing bandsaw buzz and drowned out the other sounds. A thick limb just above him joined the trunk at a right angle at the Jacoby's house. He pulled himself up until he could see and leaned around the trunk to look at it. Close by his cheek, a soft drink can was wedged between the limb and the trunk. "I love it," Graham whispered into the bark. "Oh, sweet Jesus, yes. Come on, can." Still, a child might have left it. He climbed higher on the side of the tree, dicey work on a small branch, and moved around until he could look down at the big limb. A patch of outer bark on the upper side of the limb was shaved away, leaving a field of green inner bark the size of a playing card. Centered in the green rectangle, carved through to the white wood, Graham saw a symbol. It was done carefully and cleanly with a very sharp knife. It was not the work of a child. Graham photographed the mark, carefully bracketing his exposures. The view from the big limb was good, and it had been improved. The stub of a small branch jutted down from the limb above. It had been clipped off to clear the view. The fibers were compressed, and the end slightly flattened in the cutting. Graham looked for the severed branch. If it had been on the ground, he would have seen it. There, tangled in the limbs below, brown withered leaves amid the green foliage. The laboratory would need both sides of the cut in order to measure the pitch of the cutting edges. That meant coming back here with a saw. He made several photographs of the stub. All the while he mumbled to himself, "I think after you killed the cat and threw it in the yard, my man, you climbed up here and waited. I think you watched the children and passed the time whittling and dreaming. When night came, you saw them passing their bright windows, and you watched the shades go down, and you saw the lights go out one by one. And after a while, you climbed down and went in to them." One moment. Apologies, I had a knock on the door. It wouldn't be too hard a climb straight down from the big limb with a flashlight in the bright moon rising. It was hard enough for Graham to climb up the tree. He stuck a twig into the opening of the soft drink can, gently lifted it from the crotch of the tree, and descended, holding the twig in his teeth when he had to use both hands. Back at the house project, Graham found that someone had written "Levon is a doo-doo head" in the dust of the side of his car. The height of the writing indicated that even the youngest residents were well along in literacy. He wondered if they had written on the Tooth Fairy's car. Graham sat for a few minutes, looking up at the rows of windows. There appeared to be about 100 units. It was possible that someone might remember a white stranger in the parking lot late at night. Even though a month had passed, it was well worth trying. To ask every resident and get it done quickly, he would need the help of the Birmingham police. He fought the temptation to send the drink can straight to Jimmy Price in Washington. He had to ask the Birmingham police for manpower. It would be better to give them what he had. Dusting the can would be a straightforward job. Trying for fingerprints etched by acid sweats was another matter. Price could still do it after Birmingham dusted, as long as the can wasn't handled with bare fingers. Better give it to the police. He knew the FBI document section would fall on the carving like a rabid mongoose. Pictures of that for everybody. Nothing lost there. He called Birmingham Homicide from the Jacoby house. The detectives arrived just as the realtor, Jehan, was ushering in his prospective buyers.